Over the last 30 years or so, Leibniz's mill has received a lot of attention. What is Leibniz's mill? It's an argument for the immateriality of perceptions and thoughts, and by extension, the soul or mind in which they inhere. It appears quite often in his later writings. It's used in letters written in 1702. It can be found in the new essays on human understanding. It's there in On the Souls of Men and Beasts. And it also appears in one of Leibniz's most famous writings, the Monadology, from 1714. What you wouldn't know if you'd read the existing literature on the mill argument is that its first appearance in Leibniz's writings is much earlier than 1702. In fact, Leibniz first puts forward the argument in 1685 in a text called Apology for Catholic Truth. This is one of a series of texts which Leibniz wrote in the guise of a Roman Catholic, even though he was a Lutheran himself. The texts were written in May and June 1685 as part of a project that Leibniz hoped would produce a little book, but it never did. For more details on that project, watch the video Reassembling Leibniz. Now, in Apology for Catholic Truth, Leibniz tackles some Protestant objections to the Catholic Church and also argues for the superiority of Roman Catholic principles to those of Protestants. The text ends with a discussion on the use and misuse of reason in religious matters, with Leibniz briefly outlining and responding to various doctrines of Thomas Hobbes and Spinoza. It is in response to Hobbes's claim that whatever exists is corporeal that Leibniz gives the first statement of his so-called mill argument. Let's go through it in 3 steps. This is the first. Leibniz opens with a remark that it is impossible to explain how sense, memory, consciousness and so on can be derived from size, shape and motion alone. As will become clear, he's not thinking here of a limitation of human knowledge, but as something that can be readily recognized upon reflection. He then goes on to give the argument that shows this. He begins the mill argument by inviting us to imagine any machine whatsoever. However intricate it may be, he says, what we have is still something of the same general sort as a clock or a mill. The complexity may vary from one machine to the next, but a machine remains a physical system characterized only by size, shape, and motion. In the next step of the argument, Leibniz makes the decisive move. He claims that no perception will ever arise from a machine, because each property of bodies yields only what belongs to its own kind. Motion to motion, shape to shape, extension to extension. From this, he concludes that none of these properties is any more suited than another to producing sense. Even when they're combined in different ways or arranged in increasingly complex structures, you still end up with motion, shape, and extension. However varied their combinations, they do not produce sense. In the final step of the argument, Leibniz turns to his opponents, materialists like Hobbes. If they claim that bodies consist of something beyond size, shape, and motion, then they have already conceded the existence of something incorporeal, he says, since incorporeal is understood here as whatever does not arise from those corporeal properties. Now, presumably Leibniz thinks that materialists must allow something beyond size, shape and motion in bodies, at least in living bodies, since these plainly exhibit sensation, though this is left unstated in the argument. Likewise, Leibniz doesn't say what this incorporeal something in bodies is, but on the basis of what he says elsewhere, we can suppose that he means a substantial form or soul. This then is the mill argument as Leibniz first introduces it, an argument that sense, memory, understanding, will and consciousness cannot be explained in terms of size, shape and motion alone, and that anything in bodies that does not arise from those properties must be regarded as incorporeal. If you are familiar with his other formulations of the argument, you'll notice quite a few differences when comparing them with this early version. In the early version, he doesn't invite us to walk around an enlarged machine and inspect it, seeing parts pushing parts. There's no mention of the brain, and there are no references to what we can conceive. The different ways Leibniz explains the Mill argument may mean that it is more of a family of arguments than a single argument as such. Whether that's right or not, we now know how the Mill argument was intended to work when he first formulated it back in 1685.